Good morning. We're about to begin now chapter 4 of Tractate Sotah. Just before we continue, a comment on yesterday's class. Sure, you asked about Samuel being a Nazir from birth and seemingly his mother, the one to be responsible for him being a Nazir, when our Gemara states that only the father can impose Nazireth on a child. And so we put a pin in that because I didn't want to comment before we did proper research. So Rabbi Gimple was gracious enough to send me an email with a little bit of his own research. And it seems from the Talmud elsewhere that there's a discussion as to whether Samuel was indeed a Nazir. And it seems to be accepted by Maimonides, perhaps even others, that he was a Nazir. And indeed, the question is raised by some of the commentaries as to the contradiction. Seemingly, Samuel's mother dedicated him as a Nazir, where our Gemara told us yesterday that only the father can do that. And considering this seeming apparent contradiction, there are those who suggest that we must conclude that his father also acquiesced, and that would have been the halachic Nazireth, the father agreeing to Samuel's mother's decision. But nonetheless, there's still uncertainty around this question. So, good question, Yeshua, and thank you, Rabbi, for the insight.
Thank you.
And I'm sure there's more on in the commentaries. We probably have to look up at the commentaries on the verses in the book of Samuel describing his birth. We'd also probably have to look up some of the commentaries in the tractate Nazir, where there it discusses whether Samuel was indeed a Nazir or not. I'm sure there's a lot more on the subject, but clearly this is something that hasn't been overlooked. So thank you for raising that point.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, we'll go to chapter 4. So just to bring us up to speed as to where we are in the flow of this chapter, of this tractate, because a lot of times, you can lose the forest for the tree. So the tractate is really quite systematic, notwithstanding the various different sort of side tangents that the Gemara takes, but it's systematic in describing the process of the Sotah. Way back at the beginning, we began, the overarching story of the Sotah is a husband who warns his wife in the presence of witnesses, please don't seclude yourself with X person. He has some sort of suspicion about their relationship and therefore warns her against secluding herself with a particular person. He does so in the presence of witnesses. And then she does go ahead and seclude herself with that person against his warning. He then takes her to the temple after a process of being vetted by the local court. He's then taken to he then takes her to the temple, and in the temple there's an offering, a meal offering, as well as a whole speech, if you will, given to her to inform her of how grave the process we're about to go through is, and if she has anything to confess, she should, encouraging her to confess, telling her the virtues of confessing, and so on and so forth. And if she still stands by her story saying, no, I'm innocent, I'm not confessing to anything, there was nothing happened between the two of us, her and this other person, the offering is then offered, and she's given to drink of a potion in which is mixed the ink of a parchment that had written on it various texts from the Torah, which describe the law of the Sotah. She drinks it. If she's innocent, that water she drinks becomes a blessing. If she is not innocent, that water becomes her doom, a curse for her doom. Right? There's also earth mixed into that water and so on. That's the overarching narrative. And over the last few chapters, we went from the beginning all the way to the end, describing every single detail. We got into the details of witnesses at the presence of warning, her admission, his admission, all the details of that. We got into the details of what it's like when they walk up to the temple. We got the details of the offering. We got the details of the mixture. We got the details of the text that's being written and mixed into the mixture, the ink used, the parchment used, the earth used, the water used, every single step along the way. We've got into the details and the very nitty-gritty details of this procedure. Now, the Gemara, the Mishnah, shifts its attention to discussing the nature of the relationship between, or the nature of the relationship legally between the husband and wife. What's their legal status and their relationship? And based on that, how would they go ahead in the proceeding of the Sotah? That's essentially what the Mishnah is going to get into now. What's the nature of the relationship between this husband and wife? The husband who warned this wife against secluding herself with someone else. What is their nature of their relationship? Is it ordinary marriage? Is there some illegitimate question about their marriage? Are they engaged? And so on and so forth. As well as, is there any relationship between the wife and the person about whom she's being warned? That's what this Mishnah is going to get into. Now that you know the whole story, you know the proceeding of the Sotah, who does it apply to? That's essentially where it's going. Who does it apply to? What's the nature of the relationship between husband and wife when he warns her against secluding herself with someone else? And what's the relationship between the wife and this person about whom she's being warned? To understand this, let's just make the following premise upon which the whole thing is built. The Torah says, in describing the law of the Sotah, that a man shall take his wife to the temple. So from here we understand that number one, the husband has to be present to travel with his wife to the temple, to go through the proceeding. That's number one. Number two, because the Torah refers to it as he takes his wife, therefore their relationship has to be legitimate and complete. If he is married to someone that he shouldn't have been married to, then the proceeding cannot go through because it doesn't qualify as him taking his wife, which Torah says should be his wife. But if he's not supposed to be married to her, then the proceeding doesn't go forward. This is essentially the premise for the Mishnah. Okay, so if it's not clear, please interrupt me. Otherwise, we will get into the text of the Mishnah itself. Okay, Arusa, a woman who is engaged, betrothed to be married. And during the time of their betrothal, before the marriage has been completed, before Nisuin, we nowadays do both the betrothal and the marriage in the span of 15 minutes under the chuppah. Right, but betrothal is not what we would call in modern times engagement. It's a halachic designation in which they vow to marry each other, which is that's accomplished in the moment when he gives her the ring. He says, I'm hereby, betrothing you with this ring, and she accepts. In that moment, they become betrothed. The marriage is not complete until later when the Ketubah is written. That's a rabbinic requirement. And then once they complete the marriage, which was called Nisuin or the Chuppah that they go under. So we do both together. We break up between the Kedushin and the Nisuin with the reading of the Ketubah under the Chuppah. But essentially we do both together. But in the old days, it could have been a full year. He would give her a ring and say, you're hereby betrothed to me with this ring. She accepts. And then a year later, they would actually get married. Right? So in between this time, when he gave her the ring, they're betrothed, but the marriage is not complete. He warns her and says, please don't seclude yourself with X person. Likewise, Shemeres Yavam. Shemeres Yavam, this is a woman who has been widowed from her husband, unfortunately childless. And as a result, she is now intended to be married to her deceased husband's brother. We discussed this law a number of times here. But the Torah expects, or the Torah encourages, that the brother of the deceased should marry his brother's widow, and in this way they can have children and perpetuate the brother's name who died childless. And in some ways, the marriage of the brother, the deceased brother, rolls over to the brother that's living. So the brother that's living does not have to do any act of betrothal to his sister-in-law, essentially, to the deceased brother's wife. All he has to do is consummate the marriage, move in with her, live together, and then they're fully married by biblical law. Even though by rabbinic law they do a certain ceremony where he does give her some sort of betrothal, but biblically speaking, they're already connected. The betrothal of the first brother rolls over to the second brother, and until he moves in with her and lives with her, they're in a kind of betrothal state. Now, if during this time, after his brother has passed, but he hadn't yet moved in with his sister-in-law, with his deceased brother's wife, during this time, he warns her and says, do not seclude yourself with so-and-so. So these two people, the betrothed girl and the Shemeret Yavam, the one who is waiting for her deceased husband's brother. So both of these women are in a kind of betrothed state, but they're not fully married yet. So says the Mishnah, loy shoisais, they don't drink the Sotah water. Because again, as I noted, the verse states, man takes his wife, and this is not his wife yet. She's not his wife yet. It's his intended wife, but it's not completely his wife yet, and therefore she does not drink the Sotah water. But on the other hand, loy nitles ksuba, she loses the right to her Ketubah. So just to explain what this is, right? The Ketubah, of course, is a document in which the husband takes upon himself to give his wife, in addition to taking care of his wife while he's married, which is part of the Ketubah, but the main part of a big bulk of the Ketubah is if, in the case of divorce, or in the case of her being widowed, God forbid, she gets X amount of money. And the point of the Ketubah is, as the Gemara discusses in Tractate Ketubah at length, to protect her. Because in Jewish law, marriage and divorce is on the husband. The husband enacts the marriage by giving her a ring, and the husband enacts divorce by giving her a paper, a bill of divorce, a get, which is a bill of divorce. And that leaves her at a disadvantage. A guy might take advantage, give a woman a ring, marry her for a week, do as he pleases, and then hand her a bill of divorce, and he's off to go somewhere else. And she's left with a broken marriage. So to protect her, our sages instituted that marriages are not valid unless there's a Ketubah. And the Ketubah states, you want to divorce that woman? No problem, but it's going to cost you a pretty penny. And therefore, a man's not going to marry a woman just to have fun for a week, because he knows it's going to cost him if he divorces her at the end. This is the point of the Ketubah. That's the essence of the Ketubah. Now, in a case where she misbehaved, so because she misbehaved, she was unfaithful, so she loses the Ketubah. The whole reason for the Ketubah was to protect her, so that he doesn't just throw a get at her, throw her a bill of divorce and leave her, so that he doesn't take advantage of her, and here she is taking advantage of him. And because of that, he's not held responsible. Now he's going to divorce her because she misbehaved, and now he has to pay for that too, right? It's not fair. And thus, she loses her Ketubah if she misbehaves. And therefore, in the case of the betrothed woman, or the one who's intended to her deceased husband's brother, where she's entitled to a Ketubah if he decided to divorce her, in this case, she loses a Ketubah because she expressly went against his request that she not seclude herself with a certain person. So even if we don't know for sure that she was intimate with the other person, but she clearly is looking elsewhere against her husband's wishes. And thus, I'm not going to hold him responsible to pay Ketubah when they inevitably divorce now because of their broken down relationship. So even though they cannot go through the process of her drinking the water because they aren't fully married, nonetheless, he doesn't give her the Ketubah because it's on her that she secluded herself with a man that her husband is clearly jealous of or suspicious of.
So there's no actual determination of whether or not she was guilty, just the fact that she
Correct.
secluded herself against the wishes of the brother
That's right.
is enough for her to lose her ketubah.
That's right. Let's put it this way. The Ketubah is supposed to keep them married, right? So that he shouldn't just throw a bill of divorce at her. So now we're forcing him to get married to a woman that he is suspicious of having a relationship with someone else. Because they're not fully married yet, right? They're just betrothed. And the point is, he doesn't just throw the divorce at her. So now he's being compelled to stay married to a woman who he's suspicious of another relationship. Why would we do that to him? And clearly there's grounds for the suspicion because we know for sure, we have on record that she secluded herself with this other person. So there's grounds for suspicion. So why would we financially tie him to be married to her? It's not fair.
Right. And also it's sort of giving her motivation perhaps not to marry or him not to. Well,
it's giving her
better. It would be better for him, but
it's giving her motivation not to misbehave.
Yeah, that's.
But really, the point is that the point of the ketubah is to keep the husband bound by the marriage. But there's no reason to force him to be bound to a marriage in which the woman is suspicious, with grounds, even if we don't know for sure that she misbehaved in reality. But there's certainly grounds for suspicion, and there's no reason we should tie him down financially to this marriage when he's legit suspicious.
Right.
That's how Rashi frames it. Okay. So now the Gemara, the Mishnah cites to the verse, which tells us that they have to be completely properly married in order for the proceeding of the drinking to be implemented. Shenemar, as the verse reads, Asher tista Isha tachas Isha. This proceeding of the Sotah, says the verse, is when a woman veers in the face, or literally tachas, under, or in the presence of Isha, her husband. Because the verse says that she only drinks if she veered when she was with, or she was under the auspices, so to speak, of her husband. Therefore, prat, this excludes arusa, an engaged woman who is not married yet. This is not her husband. Mishemeres yavam, or someone who's intended, because this is not her actual husband yet. Okay, so here we had a couple that wasn't fully married, and therefore we cannot make her go through the proceeding of the Sotah because the verse states she only drinks if she veered while she was tachas Isha, while she was married to her husband, and she's not married to this husband yet. She's betrothed or intended. What about a case in which they are married, but the marriage is one that Torah doesn't approve of? That's the following cases. Says the Mishnah, Almana, a widow, who is married, l'koyin gadol, to a high priest. And Torah forbids such a marriage. A high priest has to marry a single girl who's never been married before. And here he's married to a widow. So even though the marriage takes effect, in which they become legally married, but this marriage is with Torah's protest. So it's a kind of interesting middle ground. What I mean is that if a brother, let's say, were to give a ring to his sister and say, you're betrothed to me, and let's say, God forbid, they live together, that's not a marriage. Torah doesn't see this as a marriage. She has no responsibilities to him. He has no responsibilities to her. Right? So that prohibition is so deep that the marriage doesn't even take effect. However, in the case of a widow married to a kohen gadol, to a high priest, even though Torah says don't do it, but if they go ahead and do it, the marriage is still a legal marriage. And he still has the obligations to take care of her, and she still has obligations to take care of him. And they're obliged to, if they want to separate, he has to give her a bill of divorce. right? A brother and a sister who go through the charade, he doesn't have to give her a bill of divorce. They just should separate. But when it comes to a widow, to a Kohen Gadol, even though the Torah disapproves of the relationship, but nonetheless, their marriage is still a legal marriage. And in order for them to separate, he'd have to give her a divorce. So they're legitimately married, but Torah looks askance at that marriage. Similarly, Gerusha, a divorced woman, divorcee, the Chalutza, or a woman who, the intended woman mentioned before, the woman who lost her husband and is now lost her husband childless and is now intended to be with a brother. Instead of marrying the brother, they went through a process called chalitza, in which the brother separates from his intended wife, that is his deceased brother's wife, his sister-in-law. So it's not an actual divorcee, but it's kind of the divorcee, in which an intended couple decided to separate. Now, this woman, either the divorcee or the one who separated from her intended brother-in-law, who married later a Kohen Hedjed, an ordinary Kohen. So again, same thing. Their marriage is not approved of by Torah, but the marriage still takes effect. It's still a legal union, even if Torah disapproves of that relationship. Likewise, mamzeres, likewise, a girl born of an illegitimate relationship, and she is, one second, this is the right page. Oh, no, it's not the right page. Hold on a second, my apologies. So mamzeres, a woman who is born of an illegitimate relationship, Vinisina, and a woman who is called a Nasin or Nasina. This is descendants of the Gevonim, certain group of people, which the King David, because of a whole long story involving King Saul and involving betrayals and involving an inability to forgive, King David forbade this group of people from being married into the Jewish people if they went through conversion and whatnot. This is the Gevonim. So a girl born of an illegitimate relationship, a girl born of this group of people called the Gevonim, who's married to Yisrael, who's married to a Jewish person. So again, Torah looks askance at that relationship. They shouldn't have married because she's born of an illegitimate relationship, and he is an ordinary Israelite, or she's from this group called the Gevonim. She's in the Sinah. She shouldn't be married to this Jew, even though the marriage is legit, just like the widowed woman to the high priest and a divorcee to an ordinary Kohen. Likewise, the reverse. Bas Yisrael, a Jewish girl born of a legitimate relationship. She's an ordinary, good Jewish girl, but she married mamzer. She married a guy who's born of an illegitimate relationship. Likewise, the Nosin, or if this born Jewish girl, marries someone from the Gevonim, who she wasn't supposed to. So we have here how many relationships? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Widow to a high priest, a divorcee / chalutza, the girl who separated from her brother-in-law, who married an ordinary Kohen, a Jewish guy who married a girl who was born of an illegitimate relationship, a Jewish guy who married a girl from the Givonim and the Sinah, a Jewish girl who married a guy from an illegitimate relationship, or a Jewish girl who married a guy from the Givonim on Nasin. So in all 6 of these cases, they were not supposed to marry, but once they marry, their marriage is a valid legal marriage. So here too says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, Loi shoises, if he, in this relationship, whatever one of these 6 relationships, the husband then goes ahead and warns her, please do not seclude yourself with X person. She goes ahead and does. So she's a Sotah. Says the Gemara, Loi shoises, she does not drink. She cannot go through the proceedings of drinking the water. And the reason is based on the premise began at the beginning, which is they must have a legitimate relationship, because the Torah says that a person who's married to his wife warns her and she drinks while she's still married to her husband, and he takes his wife up to the temple, because the Torah keeps on using this word, Ishtoi, his wife, that means the Torah is telling us it's only a woman that Torah says you should be married to. So even though the marriage is a legal marriage, because Torah disapproves of it, therefore Torah doesn't give them or give him the privileges of being able to go with the Sotah process. And therefore, lo shoisais, therefore she would not drink the water if she was found to be a Sotah. Because the Sotah proceeding is limited to relationship that Torah approves of. But on the other hand, she also doesn't take a Ketubah for the same logic as mentioned before. The whole reason for the Ketubah is to protect her so that he does not easily divorce her because he's no longer interested. So Torah says, okay, you want to divorce her, you got to pay a pretty penny. But in this case, because she misbehaved, again, she secluded herself with someone that her husband asked her not to. So there's grounds for suspicion. So there's no reason to financially bound him to a relationship that he has legitimate reason to want to get out of. And therefore, even though she cannot go through the proceeding of the Sotah because the Torah explicitly states only someone who's in a legitimate marriage can have the privileges of the Sotah proceeding, but nonetheless, when they divorce, considering that she was suspect of being with another guy, he does not have to give her the Ketubah because it's her own actions that led to this divorce, and therefore we don't have to hold him financially bound to her mistakes. Okay, we'll stop over here, and God willing, tomorrow we're going to get into more scenarios in which some cases where the no drinking, meaning she doesn't go through the proceeding, and she doesn't get the Ketubah. Some cases in which she gets the Ketubah but doesn't drink, and other such variations that we're going to learn over the coming days.
Great.
A lot of
Thank
detail. I hope you're able to follow, and have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you.
Rabbi. All the very best to you all. Have a good day. Thank you.
Good day. Thank you.